Okay, so have you ever noticed how people who don't really meditate,
Hmm.
they always think it's about like totally emptying your mind?
Right. Like you just sit there, there's nothing going on.
Exactly. And that's so not what we see when we look at these ancient Tibetan Buddhist texts you've brought in.
Not even close.
Yeah.
In fact, emptiness in Tibetan Buddhism is a whole other ballgame.
Okay, so let's dive into that. What do we really mean when we talk about emptiness in this tradition?
Well, it's not about emptying your mind so much as it is about understanding that everything we experience,
Everything.
yeah, our thoughts, feelings, even our sense of self,
Wow, okay.
they're not as solid and permanent as we tend to think they are.
So it's more like seeing through an illusion.
Exactly. It's like realizing that the world is a kind of magic show.
Hmm.
Oh.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
And the more we see through the illusions, the more clarity we develop.
Okay.
It's like a lens that lets us see the true nature of reality.
So where does this idea of the mental continuum fit in?
Right, so the mental continuum is this understanding that the mind isn't some static thing.
Okay.
It's more like a river always flowing, always changing.
Always in motion.
Exactly. And our experiences arise and dissolve within that flow.
And these Tibetan Buddhist texts we're looking at today,
Hmm.
they actually break down meditation into two main types: examination meditation and samadhi meditation.
Yes. Examination meditation is like using your intellect.
So like critical thinking.
Exactly. To really examine and deconstruct your assumptions about the world and yourself.
Okay.
And then you have samadhi meditation, which is about directly experiencing these insights.
So it's like you study the map with examination meditation, and then you actually go on the journey with samadhi meditation.
That's a great way to put it.
I like to make it practical, you know?
Absolutely. And what's so cool about these Tibetan texts is that they don't just talk about meditation in this dry, theoretical way.
Right, they're known for being pretty out there sometimes.
They use these incredibly vivid metaphors and imagery to make these concepts come alive.
Well, and just a taste for our listeners today, we're going to be talking about the mind as a mad elephant,
Yep.
two sticks creating fire, even a mirror.
Those metaphors are so powerful for understanding how our minds actually work.
So we've got our foundation, we've unpacked some key terms and touched on these two powerful meditation practices. But how does all of this actually play out in our experience? How do these Tibetan masters guide their students on this journey to realizing emptiness and clarity? So how do we actually get started with this whole emptiness thing? Do these texts give us any practical instructions?
They do. And they don't waste any time getting right to the heart of it. The first practice we're going to look at is called emptiness of the person.
Emptiness of the person.
Yeah. And it's all about challenging this really deep-seated belief we have in a solid, independent self.
Oh, you mean like this idea that there's a me that's separate from everything else?
Exactly. That's the one. And this practice helps us see through that illusion.
Okay, how?
Well, one of the ways these texts describe it is by breaking down our experience of self into these 5 aspects called the skandhas.
5 aspects.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What are these skandhas exactly?
So the 5 skandhas are form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness,
So everything.
basically. They encompass our body, our emotions, our thoughts, our whole subjective experience, everything we usually think of as me.
So it's like we're taking apart a watch to see how all the little gears and springs work together.
That's a great analogy. We examine each skandha really carefully
Okay.
to see if we can find this solid, unchanging self anywhere within it.
What do we find?
Spoiler alert, we don't find it.
We don't.
Nope. The texts are very clear about this. There's no little me hiding out in our thoughts or feelings or sensations.
So if there's no me, who or what is actually running the show here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it brings us to this really mind-bending concept in Tibetan Buddhist thought, mind only.
Mind only. Okay, we're going to need to unpack this one. What does mind only even mean?
Essentially, it means that everything we experience arises from the mind itself.
Wait a minute. Are you saying that it's all in our heads? Like the Matrix or something?
Well, it's not quite that simple. The texts use this phrase that I love. The various are carried out in the mind, all these phenomena, mind only. What they're getting at is that even external appearances, the things we think are outside of us,
Right.
they're ultimately manifestations of the mind too.
Okay, my mind is officially blown. I think I need an example.
Okay, so imagine you see a beautiful flower, right? Its color, its shape, its smell, according to mind only. All of those qualities aren't actually inherent to the flower itself. They're projections of your mind.
So it's like the flower is just this blank canvas and our minds are painting all the details on top of it.
Exactly. And this doesn't just apply to objects. It applies to our entire experience of the world, our thoughts, emotions, even our relationships, they all arise within and are shaped by the mind.
So you're saying there's no objective reality then? Everything is subjective.
Well, it's not quite that black and white. These texts aren't saying that the flower doesn't exist. They're more interested in how we experience it.
I see.
They want us to see that our experience is always filtered through our own minds.
Yeah.
We don't see the world as it is. We see the world as we are.
Okay, that makes sense. And this is where karmic propensities come in.
Right, exactly. You're catching on.
So remind me again, what are karmic propensities and how do they fit into all of this? Okay. Karmic propensities, remind me how those work again.
Think of them like seeds we plant in our minds through our actions.
Okay.
And those seeds, they can sprout up in all sorts of ways, influencing how we see the world, how we react to things.
So using your example from earlier, two people could look at the same flower, but because of their different karmic seeds?
Exactly. One person sees beauty and peace, maybe even a sense of gratitude, but someone else, they might just see something that makes them sneeze.
And maybe they had a bad experience with flowers once, and it's colored their perception ever since.
Right, all of our past experiences, the choices we make, they create these karmic tendencies that shape our present moment.
Which brings us back to this whole idea of emptiness of phenomena, right?
Yeah.
Because it's not just about recognizing that our sense of self is impermanent, it's also realizing that our experience of the external world.
It's all happening in here.
Yeah.
In the mind.
Yeah. Exactly. So if our minds are so darn powerful, how do we work with them? How do we stop creating so much unnecessary suffering for ourselves?
That's where the practice of the skill of recognition comes in.
Skill of recognition. That sounds intense.
It is, in a way. It's about
Yeah.
developing this really sharp, clear awareness of what's happening in the mind, moment to moment.
So like being able to watch our thoughts without getting totally swept away by them.
Exactly. The texts describe it as observing the mind's flow without getting caught up in the content.
Okay, easier said than done though, right? Like my mind is really good at convincing me that my thoughts are super important.
So absolutely. The mind is a master storyteller. But here's the thing. We don't have to believe every story it tells us.
So then what do we do with all those thoughts and emotions that keep bubbling up?
The key is to not resist them. Don't try to block them out or push them away.
Really?
Because often that just makes them stronger.
So we just let them hang out.
In a way.
Yeah.
The texts use this beautiful term, rang babs. It means to let something settle into itself.
Rang babs. I like that. It's like giving those thoughts and emotions a little space to breathe, to just be what they are without making a big fuss about it.
Yes. And as we get better at this skill of recognition, our awareness starts to shift.
Shift how?
Well, imagine you're looking at a mosaic up close. You might get caught up in all the individual tiles, but as you step back...
You see the bigger picture.
Exactly. The texts call this the unspreading.
Unspreading. Tell me more about that.
It's like our awareness becomes more expansive. We start to see the interconnectedness of everything. We're not so fixated on those individual thoughts and emotions anymore.
It's like we're experiencing the whole river instead of just getting tossed around by the rapids.
That's a great way to put it. And as we become more familiar with this expansive awareness, something really interesting starts to happen.
What's that?
Our perception of time starts to dissolve.
Time. What do you mean?
Well, our usual way of experiencing time, past, present, future.
Right.
The text suggests that's really just another story our minds tell us.
So it's not real.
It's real in the sense that we experience it, but it's not this fixed, absolute thing that we often make it out to be.
Okay, so how do we work with that? How do we break free from this illusion of time?
The texts point to a state of being called the unborn, or skymed.
Skymed.
It's a state of consciousness that transcends our usual experience of time.
So it's not about literally stopping time.
Right. It's more about shifting our relationship to it. It's about recognizing that our attachment to the past and the future, to our regrets and anxieties, that's what keeps us trapped in this limited experience of time.
So by letting go of that attachment, we can experience a more spacious, more present way of being.
Exactly. And that sense of presence, of being fully here and now, that's where we find true peace and freedom.
It's amazing to think that these ancient Tibetan Buddhist texts offer such practical tools for navigating our modern lives.
I agree. They remind us that the path to freedom isn't about escaping from the world. It's about transforming our experience of it.
And that's something we could all use a little more of these days. Well, that's all the time we have for our deep dive today. But before we go, we wanted to leave you with one final thought to ponder.
Yes.
If, as these texts suggest, every single experience, even our so-called mistakes, holds the potential for wisdom and awakening.
Mm-hmm.
How might we approach our lives differently?